When a man's hand wrapped around Clara's throat in a quiet cafe, the world held its breath. She was 5 months pregnant. He was her ex-husband, the one who'd spent years convincing her she was barren, broken, worthless. But that was before Dominic Varela, before the truth revealed itself in the curve of her belly. Now, as Ethan's fingers tightened and rage distorted his features, the door opened, and the most dangerous man in the city stepped inside. 3 words changed everything. Take your hand off my wife. This is their story of violence and redemption, lies and truth, and a love that rewrote every rule. If you're watching, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. 20. The cafe smelled like cinnamon and ground coffee, the kind of place where people came to disappear into laptops and lattes. Afternoon light filtered through the front windows, cutting golden lines across worn wooden tables. It should have been peaceful. Clara Hayes sat in the corner booth, one hand resting on the swell of her belly, the other wrapped around a cup of chamomile tea that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. She'd been watching the street, lost in that particular kind of contentment that comes from finally feeling safe. 5 months pregnant. 5 months of watching her body do what everyone, especially Ethan, had told her it never could. She should have known better than to let her guard down. The door chimed. Clara's gaze drifted toward the sound out of habit, then froze. Ethan Blake stood in the entrance, his frame backlit by the late October sun. He'd lost weight. His suit hung differently, and there was something hollow in his eyes that hadn't been there during the divorce proceedings 6 months ago. But it was still him. Still the man who'd spent 3 years blaming her for every failure, every disappointment, every empty pregnancy test. Clara's heart kicked against her ribs. Her hand instinctively moved to shield her stomach. Their eyes met across the cafe. For a moment, neither moved. Then Ethan walked toward her, his footsteps deliberate, measured. The few other patrons glanced up, sensing the shift in atmosphere the way animals sense a coming storm. Clara's throat tightened. She thought about running, about calling out, about doing anything except sitting there like prey caught in a trap. But her body wouldn't cooperate. 3 years of conditioning, of making herself small, of swallowing words, of learning that resistance only made things worse, had carved pathways into her nervous system that didn't disappear just because she'd signed divorce papers. Ethan reached her table and stopped. Up close, she could see the details she'd missed from across the room, the redness in his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the way his hands flexed and unflexed at his sides. Clara. His voice was soft. Too soft. The kind of quiet that came before an explosion. Ethan. She hated how small her own voice sounded. What are you doing here? I could ask you the same thing. His gaze dropped to her belly, and something twisted in his expression, rage and disbelief, and something darker she couldn't name. But I think I can guess. She said nothing. There was nothing to say. You're pregnant. Not a question, an accusation. Clara's fingers tightened around her teacup. That's not your business anymore. Not my... He laughed, sharp and brittle. We were married for 3 years, Clara. 3 years of doctors and tests and treatments. 3 years of you crying every month when it didn't work. And now 6 months after you walk out, you're suddenly knocked up? The cruelty in his tone made her flinch, but she forced herself to meet his eyes. The doctors were wrong. No. Ethan leaned forward, planting both palms on the table. The teacup rattled. You were wrong, or you lied. Which is it, Clara? Were you lying then, or are you lying now? I never lied to you. Then explain it. His voice rose, drawing stares from the other tables. Explain how the woman who couldn't give me a child is suddenly 5 months pregnant with someone else's bastard. Heat flooded Clara's face, shame and anger warring in her chest. Don't what? Don't call it what it is? Ethan's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, yanking her forward. The teacup tipped, spilling cold chamomile across the table. You made me think I was the problem. You let me believe. Let go of me. Clara tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. Not until you tell me the truth. His other hand came up, fingers closing around her throat. Not hard enough to choke, not yet, but enough to freeze the air in her lungs. Who is he? The cafe had gone completely silent. Claire's free hand moved to protect her belly, the other still trapped in Ethan's grip. She could feel her pulse hammering against his palm, could see the wildness in his eyes that she remembered from their worst fights. This was how it always went. The quiet accusations that built into rage, the hands that started gentle and turned cruel, the apologies that would come later, hollow and meaningless. Except this time, there would be no later. This time, she had someone worth fighting for. Let go. Her voice shook, but it didn't break. You think you can just replace me? Ethan's fingers tightened fractionally. You think you can take what's mine and... The door chimed again. The sound cut through the tension like a blade, and Ethan's head snapped toward the entrance. A man stepped inside. He wasn't particularly tall, maybe 6 feet, but he carried himself with the kind of presence that made the space around him feel smaller. Dark hair, gray at the temples, a suit that cost more than Ethan's car, eyes the color of slate, cold and assessing. Dominic Varela didn't rush, didn't shout, didn't do anything except look at Ethan's hand on Clara's throat. Then he spoke, his voice carrying across the silent cafe with absolute certainty. Take your hand off my wife. The world stopped. Ethan's grip loosened, then tightened again as confusion and rage warred in his expression. You're... what? Dominic crossed the cafe in 4 measured strides. He didn't look at Clara, didn't acknowledge anyone else in the room. His entire focus was locked on Ethan like a predator spotting prey. I don't repeat myself. Dominic's tone didn't rise, didn't sharpen. If anything, it got quieter, more dangerous. Move your hand. Now. For a heartbeat, Ethan held on, whether from shock or stupidity, Clara couldn't tell. Then Dominic moved. It happened too fast for Clara to track completely. One moment, Ethan had his hand on her throat. The next, he was slammed backward into the exposed brick wall, hard enough to knock a framed print askew. Dominic's forearm was pressed across Ethan's chest, pinning him in place with the kind of casual strength that suggested he could hold that position indefinitely. I said, Dominic leaned in, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, take your hand off my wife. Ethan gasped, the air knocked from his lungs. His face had gone pale, eyes wide with shock and the first edge of real fear. No one in the cafe moved. Clara sat frozen, her hand still pressed to her throat, feeling the phantom pressure of Ethan's fingers even though they were gone. Do you understand me? Dominic's tone was conversational now, almost polite, the kind of voice you'd use to discuss the weather. Or do I need to make myself clearer? Ethan choked on the word. I didn't know. She didn't say. She doesn't owe you explanations. Dominic's grip shifted, and Ethan made a small, pained sound. She doesn't owe you anything. Do you understand? Ethan nodded frantically. Good. Dominic stepped back, releasing him. Then leave. For a moment, Ethan just stood there, gasping against the wall. His gaze darted between Dominic and Clara, confusion and rage still burning in his eyes despite the fear. This isn't over, he said, the words coming out ragged. Dominic smiled. It was not a kind expression. Yes, he said softly. It is. Something in his tone, in the absolute certainty of it, made Ethan's face go even paler. He pushed away from the wall, straightened his jacket with shaking hands, and walked toward the door without looking back. The chimes sounded as he left. Silence stretched for another 3 seconds. Then the cafe erupted. Hushed whispers, nervous laughter, the barista asking if anyone needed to call the police. Dominic ignored all of it. He turned to Clara, and the coldness in his expression melted into something else entirely. Are you hurt? He crouched beside her booth, one hand coming up to gently touch her jaw, tilting her face so he could examine her throat. Clara shook her head, not trusting her voice. Clara. His thumb brushed across her cheek, and she realized she was crying. Talk to me. I'm okay. The words came out thick, choked. I'm okay. The baby's okay. His shoulders dropped fractionally. Relief, she realized. He'd been genuinely worried. What were you thinking? The question came out sharper than she'd intended. He put his hands on you. Dominic's voice was flat, matter of fact. There was only ever going to be one outcome after that. Clara knew he was right. She also knew, with the kind of certainty that came from 6 months of learning who Dominic Varela really was, that if Ethan had hurt her, truly hurt her, the consequences would have been far worse than a shove into a wall. Dominic Varela didn't make threats. He made promises. And he always kept them. 6 months earlier. The lawyer's office smelled like old paper and lemon polish. Clara sat in an uncomfortable chair across from a woman whose expression managed to be both sympathetic and professionally neutral, a skill that probably took years to perfect. "Are you sure you don't want to contest the division of assets?" Margaret Chen, divorce attorney, slid a folder across the desk. "You're entitled to half of everything acquired during the marriage. The house, the car, his retirement accounts. I just want it to be over." Clara's voice was steady, but her hands trembled as she reached for the folder. "He can have it all." "Ms. Hayes, Mrs. Blake." The correction came automatically, even though she hated it. Hated the weight of his name, the reminder of 3 years spent trying to be enough. Margaret's expression softened. "Clara, I understand you want this finished, but you need to think about your future. You're walking away with essentially nothing. No alimony, no property settlement. I don't want his money." Clara opened the folder, scanning the endless legal jargon that boiled down to one simple truth. She was leaving with exactly what she'd brought into the marriage. Nothing. "I just want my life back." Margaret studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "All right, but if you change your mind in the next 30 days, I won't." The lawyer nodded, resigned, and pulled out another stack of papers. "Then let's go through the final details." 2 hours later, Clara walked out of the office building into bright June sunshine. The city stretched around her, Baltimore in early summer, humid and vibrant, and completely indifferent to her small personal apocalypse. She had nowhere to go. The apartment she'd shared with Ethan was his now. Her parents had moved to Arizona 3 years ago, and the friends she'd had before the marriage had slowly drifted away, tired of watching her make herself smaller and smaller to fit into Ethan's expectations. Clara stood on the sidewalk, clutching her purse and a small box containing the few personal items she'd retrieved from the apartment, and felt the full weight of her situation settle over her. 32 years old, divorced, unemployed. Ethan had convinced her to quit her job as a medical transcriptionist 2 years ago, insisting his salary was enough for both of them. Broke, alone, free. The last word surprised her, but standing there in the sunshine, feeling the warmth on her face for the first time in what felt like years, Clara realized it was true. She was free. The knowledge didn't fix anything, didn't give her a place to sleep tonight, or money for food, or any kind of plan beyond surviving the next 24 hours. But it was something. Clara took a breath, squared her shoulders, and started walking. Sebastian. She found work within a week, a waitressing job at an upscale restaurant called Meridian, the kind of place with white tablecloths and a wine list that required a sommelier to navigate. The pay was barely enough to cover the efficiency apartment she'd found in a converted warehouse, but tips could be good if she smiled at the right people and ignored the occasional wandering hand. It wasn't what she'd imagined her life would look like at 32, but it was hers. The work was exhausting in a way that felt almost cleansing. 8-hour shifts on her feet, memorizing orders, balancing trays, managing the constant low-level anxiety of trying to anticipate what people needed before they asked for it. At least when she collapsed into bed at night, she was too tired to think about anything else. She'd been working at Meridian for 3 weeks when Dominic Varela first walked through the door. Clara noticed him immediately, not because he was particularly flashy, but because of the way the restaurant's energy shifted when he entered. The host straightened. The sommelier appeared out of nowhere. Even Marcus, the head chef who rarely emerged from the kitchen, came out to greet him personally. Whoever this man was, he mattered. Clara watched from her section as he was led to a private booth in the back. Dark suit, expensive watch, an aura of controlled power that made everyone around him instinctively defer. She didn't expect to be assigned to his table, but when Jennifer, the senior waitress who usually handled the VIP section, called in sick, the manager pulled Clara aside. "Table 12, he said, gesturing toward Dominic's booth. "Don't screw this up. He's a regular, tips well, and we want to keep him happy." Clara nodded, ignoring the flutter of nerves in her stomach, and approached the table with her practiced smile in place. "Good evening. Can I start you off with something to drink?" Dominic looked up from his phone, and Clara's breath caught. Up close, he was striking in a way that had nothing to do with conventional handsomeness. Strong features, a slight crook to his nose that suggested it had been broken at least once, and eyes that seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed professional mask. He studied her for a moment, not in the way some of the male patrons did, with that evaluating hunger that made her skin crawl. This was different, curious, almost concerned. "Are you all right?" he asked. The question threw her completely off script. Yes, of course. Can I get you?" "You're favoring your left leg." Clara blinked. "Excuse me?" "Your left leg." He nodded toward her feet. "New shoes?" Heat flooded her face. The shoes were new, cheap discount store flats that she'd bought to replace the pair that had worn through after 2 weeks of constant standing. They were already raising blisters on both heels. "I'm fine," she said, the words automatic. "What can I get you to drink?" Dominic's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "Macallan 18. Neat." Clara wrote it down, relieved to be back on familiar ground. "And for dinner?" "Surprise me." She looked up sharply. "Sir?" "I trust your judgment." He closed his menu and handed it to her. "Bring me whatever you think is worth eating tonight." It was such an odd request that Clara almost questioned it, but the manager's warning echoed in her head. Don't screw this up. So she just nodded and retreated to place the order. In the kitchen, she stared at the POS system, trying to decide what to send out. Finally, she settled on the pan-seared duck breast with cherry reduction, Marcus's signature dish, the one he only made when he was in a good mood. The meal went out 20 minutes later. Clara brought it herself, setting the plate down with practiced precision. Pan-seared duck breast with roasted root vegetables and cherry port reduction. Dominic studied the dish, then looked up at her. "This is Marcus's specialty." "Yes, sir." "You gave me the best thing on the menu." "You asked for my judgment." Clara met his eyes, feeling bolder than she had in months. "That's the best we have." The corner of his mouth quirked up, not quite a smile, but close. "Fair enough." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "What's your name?" Clara hesitated. Restaurant policy encouraged them to introduce themselves to every table, but she'd been so flustered that she'd forgotten. "Clara. Clara Hayes." "Clara." He said it like he was testing the weight of it. "Thank you." "Of course." She walked away feeling oddly unsettled, aware of his gaze following her across the restaurant. For the rest of the evening, she tried to focus on her other tables, but her attention kept drifting back to the man in booth 12. He ate slowly, seemed to actually taste each bite rather than just consuming fuel. He checked his phone occasionally, but never during the meal itself, a small courtesy that most of the restaurant's clientele couldn't be bothered with. When she brought the check, he handed her a black credit card without looking at the total. "Keep the change," he said. Clara processed the payment, glanced at the receipt, and nearly dropped the tray. He'd left a $500 tip on a $90 meal. She stared at the numbers, certain there had been a mistake. But when she looked up, Dominic was already standing, buttoning his jacket. "Sir, I think—" "No mistake." He met her eyes. "Buy better shoes, Clara." Then he walked out, leaving her standing there with a receipt that represented more money than she'd made in the last 2 weeks combined. He came back the next week, and the week after that. Always the same booth, always the same quiet intensity, always a tip that was far more than the meal warranted. By the 4th visit, the other waitresses had started to notice. "What's your secret?" Jennifer cornered her in the break room, eyes sharp with curiosity and jealousy. "He never tips anyone else like that." "I don't know." Clara shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. "I just bring him food." "Honey, we all bring him food, but he looks at you different." Clara didn't know what to say to that. It was true that Dominic's visits had developed a pattern. He'd arrive around 8, order a drink, ask her to choose his meal, and spend an hour eating while occasionally asking her questions. Nothing invasive, nothing inappropriate. Just questions. "How long have you worked here?" "About 2 months." "Do you enjoy it?" A pause. Pays the bills. That's not what I asked. She'd looked at him then, really looked, and seen genuine curiosity in his expression. No, she admitted. I don't enjoy it, but it's what I have right now. He'd nodded, filed that information away, and changed the subject to the duck preparation. The conversations were brief. She had other tables to manage, but they felt significant in a way she couldn't articulate. Like each question was a small brick in a wall he was building, trying to understand who she was beneath the professional smile and careful deflections. It should have felt intrusive. Instead, it felt like being seen for the first time in years. 8 weeks after the divorce. Clara's shift had just ended when the manager called her into his office. Her first thought was that she'd done something wrong, missed a table, screwed up an order, offended someone important. But Marcus just gestured to a chair and said, "Sit down." She sat. "Mr. Varela wants to offer you a different position." Clara's brain stuttered over the words. "I'm sorry?" "He owns the building." Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying her with an expression she couldn't read. "Meridian, the coffee shop downstairs, the event space on the 3rd floor, all his, and apparently he needs someone to coordinate between the venues, handle scheduling, inventory, customer relations. It's a management position." The world tilted slightly. "Why me?" "That's what I asked." Marcus shrugged. "He said you have good judgment and an eye for detail. Also that you're wasting your potential carrying trays." Clara opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. I don't understand." "It's a job offer, Hayes, a good one. Salary, benefits, office, instead of standing on your feet for 8 hours. He slid a folder across the desk. "Details are in there. Think about it." She took the folder with numb hands, staring at the number listed under annual salary. It was 3 times what she'd been making as a medical transcriptionist. "This is insane," she whispered. "Probably." Marcus's expression softened slightly. "But Varela doesn't make offers like this without reason. If I were you, I'd take it." Clara went home that night and spread the papers across her tiny kitchen table, reading every word twice, looking for the catch. There had to be a catch. Men like Dominic Varela, wealthy, powerful, connected, didn't just hand out 6-figure jobs to waitresses they barely knew. Except apparently they did. The next evening, when Dominic arrived for his usual dinner, Clara approached his table with the folder in hand. "I need to know why," she said without preamble. He looked up from his phone. "Why what? Why me? Why this job? Why any of it?" She set the folder on the table between them. "I'm nobody. I have no experience managing anything. I'm barely holding my life together, so why?" Dominic set his phone down, giving her his full attention. "You want the truth? Please." "You remind me of someone." His voice was quiet, almost reflective. "Someone who deserved better than what life handed her, and I have the resources to offer you something better. So I am." "That's not a reason. That's charity." "No." His gaze sharpened. "Charity would be writing you a check and walking away feeling good about myself. This is a job offer. You'll earn every dollar, and if you're not good at it, I'll fire you." Clara studied his face, looking for deception, for ulterior motives, for anything that would explain this absurd situation. All she saw was honesty. "I don't understand you," she said finally. "You don't have to." Dominic leaned back. "You just have to decide if you're brave enough to say yes." The word hung between them. Brave. When was the last time anyone had called her brave? When was the last time she'd felt like anything other than a collection of failures and bad decisions? "Okay," Clara heard herself say. "Yes, I'll take it." Something flickered in Dominic's expression. Satisfaction, maybe. Or relief. "Good. You start Monday." She nodded, picked up the folder, and turned to leave. "Clara." She looked back. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I think you're going to be excellent at this." It was such a small thing, a simple expression of confidence. But standing there in her cheap shoes with blisters on her heels and her entire future suddenly rewritten, it felt like everything. The job changed everything. Within a week, Clara discovered that Dominic hadn't exaggerated. She would earn every dollar. Coordinating 3 separate venues meant juggling demanding clients, temperamental chefs, overlapping schedules, and 1,000 small crises that erupted daily. The coffee shop needed a new espresso machine. The event space had double-booked a wedding and a corporate retreat. Meridian's sommelier had quit without notice. Clara handled it all. She worked 12-hour days that first month, learning the rhythms of each business, building relationships with staff who'd initially viewed her with suspicion. This waitress who'd somehow leapfrogged into management. But she proved herself through sheer competence and a willingness to do whatever needed doing, whether that meant covering a shift at the coffee shop or personally resolving a dispute between a bride and the catering manager. Dominic watched from a distance, appearing occasionally to check on operations but never micromanaging. He trusted her to do the job. That trust felt more valuable than the salary. Clara found an apartment closer to work, nothing fancy, but it had actual sunlight and didn't smell like mildew. She bought professional clothes that fit properly, started sleeping through the night without nightmares about Ethan's voice telling her she'd never be good enough. For the first time since the divorce, she could breathe. 3 months into the job, Dominic called her into his office on the 4th floor, a space she'd only glimpsed in passing, all dark wood and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. "Sit," he said, gesturing to one of the leather chairs across from his desk. Clara sat, trying to ignore the flutter of anxiety in her chest. "Is something wrong?" "No, I wanted to discuss your performance review." "It's only been 3 months. And you've increased coordination efficiency by 40%, reduced scheduling conflicts by 60%, and somehow convinced Marcus that having a unified inventory system is a good idea." Dominic's mouth quirked. "That alone deserves a raise." Clara blinked. What?" He slid a paper across the desk. 15% increase, effective immediately, along with equity options if you stay another year. She stared at the numbers, feeling that same sense of unreality that had plagued her since accepting this position. "You don't have to do this." "I know." Dominic leaned back in his chair, studying her with that intensity she'd come to recognize. "But you've proven your worth investing in." "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why do you care?" Something shifted in his expression, a brief shadow of old pain. "I told you, you remind me of someone." "Who?" For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said quietly, "My sister." Clara went still. "Elena." His voice was carefully controlled, each word measured. "She was smart, capable, should have had the world at her feet, but she married the wrong man, someone who spent 5 years convincing her she was worthless. By the time she realized what was happening, she'd lost herself completely." "What happened to her?" "She got out, eventually." Dominic's jaw tightened. "But it took longer than it should have. And when I see someone else in that situation, someone trying to rebuild from nothing, I help if I can." The pieces suddenly clicked into place. The job offer, the concern about her shoes, the way he'd looked at her that first night, like he was seeing someone else entirely. "I'm not your sister," Clara said gently. "I know." His gaze met hers. "But maybe I can do for you what I couldn't do for her quickly enough. Give you the foundation to build something better." The honesty in his voice made her throat tight. "Thank you." He nodded, dismissing the gratitude as if it made him uncomfortable. "Now, about the wedding crisis next month. I'm told the bride wants to change the entire color scheme 2 weeks before the event?" Clara groaned. "Don't remind me." They spent the next hour discussing logistics, the conversation flowing easily between business and the occasional personal tangent. It had become routine over the past months, these meetings that were ostensibly professional but felt increasingly like something else. Friendship, maybe? Clara hadn't had one of those in years. That evening, after most of the staff had gone home, she stayed late finishing paperwork in her small office. The building was quiet, except for the distant clatter from Meridian's kitchen as they prepped for tomorrow's service. A knock on her doorframe made her look up. Dominic stood there in shirt sleeves, jacket discarded somewhere, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. "You're still here," he observed. "So are you." "Fair point." He stepped into the office, glancing at the chaos of spreadsheets covering her desk. "Have you eaten?" Clara tried to remember if she'd had lunch. "I had coffee." "That's not food." "It's food adjacent." His expression turned disapproving in a way that made her bite back a smile. "Come on." "Where?" "Dinner." There's a place down the street that makes actual food, not coffee. She should say no, should maintain professional boundaries, keep this relationship strictly business, despite the blurring lines of the past months. But she was hungry and tired, and the thought of going home to her empty apartment held zero appeal. Okay, she heard herself say. The restaurant was small and warm, the kind of neighborhood Italian place where everyone seemed to know Dominic by name. They settled into a corner booth, and Clara realized with a start that this felt familiar. Not unlike those early evenings at Meridian when he'd sit in booth 12 and ask her questions. Except now she could ask her own. "Tell me about Elena," she said after they'd ordered. "Is she happy now?" Dominic's expression softened. "She is, remarried to someone who actually deserves her. 2 kids, runs her own business." He paused. "It took time, but she found herself again." "That's good." "It is." His gaze settled on her. "What about you? Are you happy?" The question caught her off guard. Yes. Happier than I've been in years, but not completely happy." It wasn't a question, and Clara found she couldn't lie to him. "I'm working on it. Some things take longer to rebuild than others." "Like what?" She hesitated, twisting her napkin between her fingers. "Like believing I'm not fundamentally broken." The words hung in the air between them, more honest than she'd meant to be. Dominic leaned forward. "Who told you that you were broken?" "Ethan." His name tasted bitter. 3 years of doctors and treatments and negative pregnancy tests. 3 years of him finding new ways to remind me that I couldn't give him what he wanted. Eventually, I started believing him. He was wrong. Maybe. Probably. Clara shrugged, trying for casual and missing by miles. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it are different things. Their food arrived, providing a welcome interruption. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the conversation drifting to lighter topics, the absurdity of the bride's demands, Marcus's ongoing war with the new sous chef, the coffee shop's attempt to add oat milk to the menu. It felt normal, easy, like something Clara hadn't realized she'd been missing. "Can I ask you something?" Dominic said eventually. "Sure. Why did you stay as long as you did with Ethan?" Clara set down her fork, considering the question. "Because leaving felt impossible. He had the money, the house, the career. I had nothing, and he was very good at making me believe that nothing was all I deserved." She met Dominic's eyes. "By the time I found the courage to walk away, I'd convinced myself I was doing him a favor." "You weren't broken, Clara. You were being broken. There's a difference." The certainty in his voice made something crack open in her chest, a small, painful fracture in the armor she'd built around the deepest parts of herself. "How do you know?" she whispered. "Because I've watched you rebuild yourself over the past 3 months, and broken things don't do that." Clara felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them away furiously. "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me. The real me, not the version Ethan tried to create." Dominic reached across the table and covered her hand with his. The touch was warm, solid, completely platonic, and yet it sent electricity racing up her arm. "The real you is worth seeing," he said quietly. Something shifted between them in that moment. A line crossed, perhaps. Or maybe just acknowledged. Clara pulled her hand back gently, suddenly aware of how dangerous this was becoming. He was her boss. Her benefactor, the person who'd quite literally saved her from drowning. Getting involved with them would be the worst possible decision. But when she looked at Dominic across the table, she couldn't deny the truth growing in her chest like a stubborn weed pushing through concrete. She was falling for him. And from the way he was looking at her, she suspected the feeling might be mutual. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like coming home. They walked back to the building slowly, neither eager to end the evening. The October air had turned crisp, carrying the smell of salt water from the harbor. "Thank you for dinner," Claire said when they reached her car. "Thank you for the company." Dominic's hands were in his pockets, his expression unreadable in the streetlight. "Clara." Her phone rang, cutting him off. She glanced at the screen and froze. Ethan. She hadn't heard from him since signing the divorce papers 3 months ago. Had hoped, foolishly, that she never would again. "You should answer that," Dominic said, his voice careful. Clara hit decline. No, I really shouldn't. Is it my ex-husband? The words tasted like ash. I don't know why he's calling, and I don't care. Except the phone rang again. And again. After the fourth call, Clara answered, her voice sharp. What do you want, Ethan? We need to talk. We have nothing to talk about. We're divorced. It's over. It's not over. His voice was ragged, almost desperate. Clara, please, I need to see you. No. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. 5 minutes to explain. Explain what? That you spent 3 years destroying me? That you blamed me for something that was never my fault? Her voice rose, months of suppressed anger finally breaking free. You don't get to do this. You don't get to call me up and demand explanations after what you did. I know I hurt you. You don't know anything. Clara's hand was shaking. Lose my number, Ethan. Don't call again. She hung up and immediately blocked the contact, her heart hammering against her ribs. Dominic watched her silently, his expression dark. I'm sorry, Clara said. That was... Don't apologize. His voice was hard. Is he going to be a problem? No, he's just... She stopped, unsure how to explain. I think he's having trouble letting go. Then I'll make sure he learns how. The promise in those words sent a shiver down her spine. Dominic, if he contacts you again, you tell me immediately. Understood? She should object. Should insist she could handle this herself. But the truth was, she didn't want to handle it alone anymore. Understood, she said quietly. Dominic walked her to her car, waited until she was safely inside, and only left once she'd driven away. Clara watched him disappear in her rearview mirror, feeling the weight of the evening settle over her like a blanket. Something had changed tonight. She just wasn't sure if that was good or terrifying. Probably both. The weeks that followed fell into a new rhythm. Work remained demanding but satisfying. Clara's confidence grew with each crisis she successfully managed, each decision that proved sound. The staff no longer viewed her as an outsider, but as someone who genuinely cared about making the businesses run smoothly. And Dominic was always there, not hovering, not controlling, just present in a way that felt both protective and empowering. They started having lunch together once a week, ostensibly to discuss operations, but increasingly veering into personal territory. She learned about his childhood in Brooklyn, the restaurant his parents had run before they died, the path that had led him from poverty to owning half the commercial real estate in this part of Baltimore. He learned about her small-town Ohio upbringing, her degree in communications that she'd never fully utilized, the quiet dreams she'd abandoned when Ethan convinced her they were impractical. What would you do? Dominic asked one afternoon as they shared takeout in his office. If you could do anything. Money, no object, no limitations. Clara considered the question. I'd like to write. Write what? I don't know. Stories, maybe, or articles. Something that matters. She felt foolish admitting it. It's stupid. It's not stupid. Dominic's expression was serious. Why don't you? Because I have a job. Responsibilities. You have evenings, weekends. I don't have time. Clara. He leaned forward. What's the real reason? She looked away, feeling exposed. Because Ethan spent 3 years telling me I wasn't good enough. That my writing was a hobby, not a career. That I should focus on supporting him instead of chasing pipe dreams. Ethan was an idiot. The bluntness made her laugh despite herself. Maybe. Not maybe. Definitely. Dominic's gaze held hers. If you want to write, write. Stop waiting for permission from people who don't deserve to have opinions about your life. The words settled into her chest, taking root. That night, for the first time in years, Clara opened a blank document and started writing. The words came slowly at first, rusty from disuse. But they came, and with them, another small piece of herself clicked back into place. She was so focused on rebuilding her life that she didn't notice the signs at first. The exhaustion that lingered despite adequate sleep, the way certain smells suddenly turned her stomach, the strange tenderness in her breasts. When she missed her period, she dismissed it as stress. When she missed the second one, she bought a pregnancy test. She took it in the bathroom of her apartment on a Tuesday morning, hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped the stick. 3 minutes. the longest 3 minutes of her life. When the 2 lines appeared, Clara's knees gave out. She sat on the bathroom floor, staring at the test, waiting for reality to reassemble itself into something that made sense. Pregnant. She was pregnant. The doctors had been wrong. Ethan had been wrong. All those years of being told her body was broken, that she was the problem, that she'd never give him what he wanted, all of it. Wrong. Clara started laughing, then crying, then laughing again, the sounds echoing off the bathroom tiles. She was pregnant, and the father was Dominic Varela. The laughter died. They'd been careful. They'd used protection. They'd only been together twice. Once, after a particularly difficult day, when comfort had turned into something more, and again a week later when they'd stopped pretending they could maintain professional boundaries. Both times had been intense, emotional, completely overwhelming, and apparently effective. Clara pressed a hand to her still flat stomach, feeling the world tilt on its axis. She had to tell him, but the thought of walking into his office and announcing she was pregnant with his child, after knowing him for barely 4 months, after he'd given her a job and a future and asked for nothing in return. How did you have that conversation? Dominic, remember how you hired me out of charity? Well, surprise, you're going to be a father. It sounded insane even in her head. Clara spent 3 days rehearsing the conversation, trying to find words that didn't sound like she was trapping him, or expecting something or completely losing her mind. She never got the chance. Because on Thursday afternoon, while she was coordinating a corporate event in the 3rd-floor venue, Ethan walked through the door. Clara saw him across the room and froze. He looked worse than he had at the lawyer's office. Thinner, disheveled, with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and bad decisions. Their eyes met. Clara's hand instinctively moved to her stomach, a protective gesture she immediately regretted when she saw Ethan's gaze follow the movement. No, he couldn't know, couldn't possibly. But his expression shifted, something dark and ugly sliding across his features. Clara. He started toward her, weaving between tables being set up for tomorrow's event. She should run, should call security, should do anything except stand there like a deer in headlights. But her body betrayed her, freezing under the weight of 3 years' conditioning. Ethan stopped 3 feet away, close enough that she could smell whiskey on his breath. You look different, he said. What are you doing here? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. I needed to see you. You won't answer my calls because we have nothing to say to each other. Don't we? His gaze dropped to her stomach again. You're pregnant. It wasn't a question. Clara's heart stopped. That's none of your business. Isn't it? Something manic flickered in his eyes. We were married 3 years, Clara. 3 years of trying, and now, barely 6 months after you leave, you're knocked up with some other man's kid? Keep your voice down. Why? Ethan laughed, sharp and bitter. Ashamed of it? Or ashamed of me? I'm not doing this with you. Clara turned to leave, but his hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. You owe me an explanation. I owe you nothing. She tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. Let go. Not until you tell me the truth. Was it me? Was I the problem all along? The question hung between them, 3 years of pain and blame compressed into 6 words. Yes, Clara said quietly. You were always the problem. His face twisted with rage. You lying to... The doctors were wrong, Ethan. My body was fine. It was us, you and me together. That didn't work. And maybe if you'd spent less time blaming me and more time looking at yourself, we would have figured that out sooner. So you just moved on? His voice rose, drawing stares from the event staff. Found some new guy to give you what I couldn't? I found someone who treats me like a human being instead of a broken appliance. That's what I found. The slap came out of nowhere. Clara's head snapped to the side, her cheek exploding with pain. She stumbled backward, hand flying to her face. The room went silent. Ethan stared at his own hand like it belonged to someone else, shock and horror warring in his expression. Clara, Get out. Her voice was ice. I didn't mean... Get out! The event coordinator appeared, phone already in hand. I'm calling security. Ethan backed toward the door, his face pale. This isn't over. Yes, Clara said, her hand still pressed to her burning cheek. It is. He left. Clara stood in the middle of the event space, surrounded by concerned staff, feeling the imprint of Ethan's hand on her face and the weight of his words in her chest. She told herself he couldn't hurt her anymore. She'd been wrong. The event coordinator touched her arm gently. Are you okay? Should we call the police? No. Clara straightened, forcing steel into her spine. No police. Just make sure he doesn't get back in the building. Already done. I've sent his photo to all the security guards. Thank you. Clara excused herself and headed for the bathroom, needing a moment to collect herself before anyone else saw her crying. She made it 3 steps before Dominic appeared in the doorway. His gaze went immediately to her face, to the red mark blooming across her cheek, and his entire demeanor changed. The controlled, careful businessman vanished. What remained was something far more dangerous. Who? His voice was barely above a whisper. Who did this? Dominic. Who? Clara? She'd never seen him like this. Never seen the violence lurking beneath his polished exterior rise so close to the surface. My ex-husband, she said quietly. He showed up. We argued. Where is he? He left. Security escorted him out. Dominic's jaw worked, fury radiating off him in waves. Did he hurt you anywhere else? The baby. He stopped. Silence crashed over them. Claire's hand moved instinctively to her stomach, and she saw the exact moment understanding dawned in Dominic's eyes. You're pregnant, he said softly. She nodded, unable to speak. Is it? He stopped, recalibrated. Am I? Yes. The single word hung between them, reshaping everything. Dominic crossed the space between them in 2 strides and pulled her against his chest, one hand cradling the back of her head while the other settled protectively over her stomach. How long have you known? His voice was rough. 3 days. I was trying to figure out how to tell you. And he found out before I did. He guessed. I didn't confirm it, but Clara. Dominic pulled back enough to look at her face, his thumb brushing gently across her injured cheek. Are you okay? The question broke something open inside her. I don't know. Come on. He kept one arm around her, steering her toward the elevator. You're done for today. I have work. I don't care. You're coming upstairs, we're putting ice on your face, and then we're talking. She didn't argue. 20 minutes later, Clara sat on Dominic's office couch with an ice pack pressed to her cheek while he paced the room like a caged predator. I want to press charges, he said. No. He assaulted you, Clara. That's not something we ignore. Pressing charges means police reports and court dates and having to see him again. She lowered the ice pack. I just want him gone. Dominic stopped pacing and looked at her. Then he'll be gone. The certainty in his voice sent a chill down her spine. What does that mean? It means I'm going to make sure Ethan Blake understands that touching you was the biggest mistake of his miserable life. Dominic, I'm not asking for permission. He crouched in front of her, his hands covering hers. You're carrying my child. That makes you and the baby my responsibility, my priority, and I will do whatever it takes to keep you both safe. Clara searched his face, seeing the truth there. You're serious. Completely. I can handle this myself. You shouldn't have to. His grip tightened. Let me handle it, please. She knew she should refuse, should insist on independence, on fighting her own battles. But she was tired. Tired of being strong, of standing alone, of pretending she didn't need anyone. Okay, she whispered. Dominic's expression softened. Okay. He stood, pulled her gently to her feet, and wrapped his arms around her. We'll figure this out. All of it. The baby is a gift, not a problem. Clara felt tears burn behind her eyes. You don't have to say that. I'm not saying it because I have to. I'm saying it because it's true. He pulled back to look at her. I meant what I said that first night at dinner. You're worth investing in, Clara. You and now our child. This is crazy. We barely know each other. Then we'll get to know each other better. His hand settled over her stomach, warm and sure. We have time. Clara leaned into him, letting his certainty anchor her. She was pregnant, Ethan knew, and Dominic Varela, dangerous, powerful, impossibly kind Dominic, had just promised to protect her. The world had shifted again, but for the first time, Clara felt like she was standing on solid ground. That night, Dominic took her to his penthouse, a sprawling space overlooking the harbor that was somehow both luxurious and lived in, with books stacked on tables and a well-worn leather couch that spoke of actual use rather than interior design. "You should stay here tonight," he'd said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I don't want you alone." Clara hadn't protested. The thought of returning to her empty apartment, of lying awake wondering if Ethan would show up at her door, made her skin crawl. So she'd followed him home like it was the most natural thing in the world. Now she sat curled on that leather couch, a mug of herbal tea warming her hands, while Dominic stood at the windows making phone calls in a voice too low for her to hear clearly. She caught fragments, names she didn't recognize, instructions delivered with quiet authority. And once, very clearly, "I don't care what it costs. Find everything." When he finally hung up and returned to the couch, his expression was unreadable. "What did you just do?" Clara asked. "Made some calls." "That's not an answer." Dominic sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "I have people looking into Ethan. His finances, his employment history, where he's living, who he associates with. Everything." "Why?" "Because men who hit pregnant women don't suddenly develop impulse control. He'll come back, Clara. And when he does, I want to know exactly what pressure points to use." The casual way he said it, like planning someone's destruction was just another item on his to-do list, should have frightened her. Instead, she felt safe. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "Yes, I do." His hand found hers, threading their fingers together. "You're carrying my child. That changes everything." "Does it?" The question came out smaller than she'd intended. "Because we never talked about what this is, what we are." Dominic turned to face her fully. "What do you want us to be?" Clara's breath caught. "I don't know. A month ago, you were my boss, someone who helped me when I needed it, and now you're pregnant with my baby, and I'm planning how to neutralize your abusive ex-husband." His mouth quirked. "I'll admit, it's moved faster than I expected." "Are you scared?" "Terrified." The admission came easily, honestly. "I never planned on having children. Never thought I was the kind of man who should. But here we are." "Why didn't you think you should have children?" He was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing patterns on the back of her hand. "Because of what I do. Who I am. The world I operate in isn't exactly child-friendly." Clara studied his profile, seeing the tension in his jaw. "What exactly do you do, Dominic?" "I own restaurants and event spaces." "That's what you do legally." She'd wondered for months, noticed the deference people showed him that went beyond respect for a successful businessman. "But that's not all of it, is it?" His gaze met hers, weighing how much truth to share. "No, that's not all of it." "Tell me. Are you sure you want to know?" Clara thought about it, really thought about it. She could walk away right now, take the out he was offering. Pretend she didn't notice the way people tensed when he entered a room, the phone calls he took in other languages, the security detail that followed him like shadows. But she was carrying his child. That meant she needed to know exactly what world she was bringing a baby into. "Tell me," she repeated. Dominic stood and walked back to the windows, his silhouette dark against the city lights. "My family came from nothing. Immigrants who worked themselves to death running a restaurant in Brooklyn. When they died, I was 19 and had nothing except debts they'd left behind, and people who wanted to collect." He paused, and Clara waited. "I paid those debts, built something from nothing, learned that in certain circles the right connections matter more than capital, and I cultivated those connections." He turned to face her. "I'm not a criminal, Clara, but I operate in spaces where the line between legitimate business and other interests gets blurry." "What does that mean?" "It means I own legal businesses, but I also know people who don't. And sometimes I act as a bridge between those worlds. I facilitate introductions, provide neutral territory for meetings, handle problems that can't be solved through conventional channels." Clara's heart was racing. What kind of problems? The kind that involve large amounts of money changing hands without official documentation. The kind where people need disputes resolved quietly. The kind where asking questions is dangerous. He crossed back to the couch, sitting close enough that she could see the tension in his eyes. I've never hurt anyone who didn't deserve it. Never dealt in anything that destroys lives. But I'm not a saint, Clara. And if you're going to be part of my life, if our child is going to be part of my life, you need to understand that. The room felt suddenly smaller, the weight of his confession pressing down on them both. Are you in danger? Clara asked. Is our baby going to be in danger because of this? No. The certainty in his voice was absolute. I've built my reputation on being untouchable. Switzerland in a world of warring factions. No one would risk coming after me because everyone needs the neutral ground I provide. But Ethan is a civilian, a pathetic man having a breakdown. He's not part of that world, and he doesn't get to threaten what's mine. Dominic's hand settled on her knee. I can handle Ethan without involving any of that. This is personal, not business. Clara absorbed this, trying to reconcile the man who'd given her a job and held her gently with the one who casually discussed operating between legal and illegal worlds. I should be scared of you, she said finally. Probably. But I'm not. His expression softened. Why not? Because you've never made me feel anything except safe. Even now, knowing what you've just told me, I trust you more than I've trusted anyone in years. She touched her stomach. And I think this baby is going to be lucky to have you as a father. Something shifted in Dominic's face, vulnerability breaking through the carefully controlled exterior. You mean that? I do. He pulled her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her with a tenderness that contradicted everything he'd just revealed about himself. I won't let anything happen to either of you. That's a promise. Clara believed him. They stayed like that for a long time, the city glittering below them while they sat in the quiet darkness of his living room and tried to figure out what came next. Eventually, Dominic showed her to the guest room, a space with its own bathroom and a bed large enough to get lost in. He kissed her forehead, told her to sleep, and disappeared into his own room down the hall. Clara lay awake for hours, one hand on her stomach, processing everything that had happened in the past 12 hours. Ethan had found her, had hit her, had learned about the pregnancy. And Dominic Varela, dangerous, powerful, impossibly complicated Dominic, had claimed both her and the baby as his. The world had irrevocably changed. Clara finally fell asleep sometime after 2, her dreams filled with fragments of the past and shadows of an uncertain future. She woke to the smell of coffee and found Dominic in the kitchen, already dressed for work, talking on his phone in rapid Spanish. He saw her and held up one finger, almost done. Clara poured herself orange juice and settled at the kitchen island, watching him move through his space with easy confidence. He hung up and turned to her. How are you feeling? Confused, tired, nauseous. She grimaced. Morning sickness is poorly named. It's all-day sickness. What helps? Crackers, apparently, and ginger tea. He opened a cabinet and pulled out both, setting them in front of her with the care of someone handling something precious. Eat. Then we need to talk about next steps. Next steps for what? Everything. He poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter. Your living situation, Ethan, the baby, how we're handling this publicly. Clara nibbled a cracker, her stomach rebelling even against that. Publicly? People are going to notice you're pregnant. They're going to ask questions, and when they connect you to me, which they will, there will be assumptions. What kind of assumptions? That you slept your way into a management position, that I took advantage of an employee, that this baby is some kind of business arrangement. His jaw tightened. I want to control that narrative before it controls us. How? Dominic set down his coffee and came around the island to stand in front of her. Marry me. Clara choked on her cracker. What? Marry me. Not right away. We'll wait a few months. Make it look like we fell in love rather than that you got pregnant. But commit to it now. Give this baby a legitimate family from the beginning. That's insane. It's practical. It's a business arrangement. Clara stared at him. You're proposing a marriage of convenience to avoid gossip? I'm proposing a marriage that gives our child stability and you protection. Gossip is just a side benefit. She couldn't believe they were having this conversation. Dominic, people don't get married just because of a baby anymore. This isn't the 1950s. People in my world do. Family matters. Legitimacy matters. And he stopped, something shifting in his expression. I want to. That's the part that probably should scare you most. This isn't just strategy, Clara. I genuinely want to marry you. Her heart stuttered. Why? Because in 4 months, you've become the most important person in my life. Because when I picture the future, you're in it. Because the thought of you going home alone every night makes me irrationally angry. He cupped her face gently, mindful of the fading bruise on her cheek. Because I'm falling in love with you, and I'd rather be honest about that than pretend this is purely transactional. Clara's breath caught. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're brave and smart and stronger than you give yourself credit for. I know you rebuilt yourself from nothing and didn't let bitterness poison you. I know you're going to be an incredible mother. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. And I know that when Ethan put his hands on you yesterday, I wanted to kill him. That's not a rational business decision. That's what happens when someone threatens the person you love. Tears welled in Clara's eyes. This is crazy. Probably. We should take it slow. Get to know each other better. Make rational decisions. We're having a baby together, Clara. Rational went out the window 2 months ago. He smiled, and it transformed his entire face. But I'm not going to rush you. Think about it. We have time. How much time? Until you start showing enough that people notice. 3 months, maybe 4. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. Use that time to decide if you can see yourself building a life with me. And I'll use it to prove I'm worth taking a chance on. Clara leaned into him, her mind spinning. Marriage. To Dominic Varela. A man she'd known for 4 months, who operated in morally gray spaces, who just confessed to falling in love with her while offering a business arrangement disguised as romance. It should have been the easiest no of her life. But when she looked at him, really looked at the way he held her like she was something precious, the way he dropped everything to protect her, the absolute certainty in his eyes when he talked about their future, she couldn't quite bring herself to refuse. Okay, she heard herself say. I'll think about it. Dominic's smile widened. That's all I'm asking. They stood in his kitchen, wrapped around each other, while the morning sun streamed through the windows, and Clara felt the future crystallizing into something both terrifying and wonderful. The next 3 weeks fell into an unexpected rhythm. Clara officially moved into Dominic's penthouse after he pointed out that her apartment didn't have security and his building did. She told herself it was temporary, practical, the smart choice for someone who'd been assaulted by her ex-husband. But she knew the truth. She was falling for him too. It happened in small moments, the way he always had ginger tea waiting when she woke up nauseous, how he'd rearranged his schedule to drive her to her first prenatal appointment, sitting in the waiting room reading pregnancy books like he was studying for an exam. The night she'd broken down crying over nothing, and he'd simply held her until the hormonal storm passed. He was patient, attentive, careful not to push for more than she was ready to give, but Clara could feel the tension building between them, the awareness that they were dancing around something inevitable. It finally broke on a Saturday night. They'd spent the day doing nothing, watching movies, ordering takeout, existing in the comfortable domesticity that had somehow become their default. Clara wore one of his shirts and soft pajama pants, her body finally starting to show the subtle changes of early pregnancy. Dominic couldn't stop looking at her. What? She asked, catching him staring for the 3rd time in an hour. You're beautiful. Clara rolled her eyes. I'm bloated and exhausted and can't fit into half my clothes. You're carrying my child. That makes you the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. The sincerity in his voice made her throat tight. Dominic, I mean it, Clara. Every word. She set down the remote and turned to face him fully. Why me? You could have anyone. Someone from your world who understands it, who fits into it naturally. Why choose the broken waitress with baggage? You're not broken. He moved closer, his hand coming up to cup her face. And you're not a waitress. You're brilliant and resilient, and you see me, the real me, without flinching. Do you have any idea how rare that is? I flinch sometimes, she admitted. When you make phone calls in Spanish and I can hear the edge in your voice. When men show up at the restaurant looking nervous, and you meet them in your office with the door closed. When I remember that the man I'm falling for operates in a world I don't fully understand. Does it scare you? Clara considered the question honestly. Sometimes. But not as much as losing this scares me. Not as much as going back to being invisible and small and convinced I don't deserve good things. Dominic's thumb traced her lower lip. You deserve everything. So do you. The kiss happened naturally, inevitably. His mouth found hers with a gentleness that made her ache, one hand cradling her face while the other settled on the small swell of her stomach. Clara melted into him, months of tension and denial finally giving way to the truth she'd been avoiding. She loved him, completely, terrifyingly, irrevocably. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dominic rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he whispered. "Not because it's practical or strategic, because I love you and I want to build a life with you." "Yes." The word came without hesitation, without doubt. "Yes?" "Yes," Clara laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "I'll marry you, Dominic Varela, and we'll figure out the rest as we go." His smile could have lit the entire city. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Clara felt the last pieces of her old life finally fall away. She wasn't Ethan's broken wife anymore. She was Dominic's partner, the mother of his child, the woman he loved, and that was more than enough. They spent that night tangled together, relearning each other's bodies with the knowledge that this time it meant something permanent. Dominic was impossibly gentle, hyper-aware of her changing body, checking constantly to make sure she was comfortable. "I'm not going to break," Clara murmured against his mouth. "I know. But you're precious cargo now." She laughed and pulled him closer, losing herself in the warmth of his skin and the certainty of his touch. Afterward, they lay in the darkness, Clara's head on his chest while his fingers traced idle patterns on her shoulder. "We should tell people," Dominic said quietly. "About the engagement or the baby?" "Both, starting with Elena." Clara lifted her head to look at him. "Your sister? Why her first?" "Because she'll be thrilled and supportive, and we could use that before dealing with everyone else." He smiled. "Also because she's going to figure it out anyway. She has a sixth sense for this kind of thing." "What about my parents?" "What about them?" Clara grimaced. "They're going to think I'm repeating patterns, rushing into another marriage, getting pregnant too fast. They won't understand." "Do you care what they think?" The question stopped her. Did she? Her parents had never approved of Ethan, but they'd kept their opinions to themselves until after the divorce. Then they'd moved to Arizona and called once a month out of obligation rather than genuine interest. "No," she realized. "I don't think I do anymore." "Good. Because we're not living our lives for other people's approval." Clara settled back against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her ear. "When do you want to actually get married? How soon can we make it happen without looking suspicious?" "Dominic, I'm serious. I want you legally mine as soon as possible." The possessiveness in his tone should have bothered her. Instead, it sent heat pooling in her stomach. 3 months. That gives us time to plan something simple and makes it look less like a shotgun wedding. 3 months. He considered it. "I can work with that." They fell silent for a while, both lost in thoughts of a future that had seemed impossible just months ago. "Clara?" "Thank you." She lifted her head again. "For what?" "For saying yes. For trusting me. For giving me something I didn't know I wanted until I met you." His hand settled over her stomach. "For this." Tears pricked her eyes. The hormones made her cry at everything lately. "I should be thanking you. You saved me, Dominic." "No." His voice was firm. "You saved yourself. I just gave you the tools." Clara kissed him, pouring everything she couldn't articulate into the touch. When they finally broke apart, she whispered against his lips, "I love you." "I love you too." They fell asleep tangled together, Clara's hand over Dominic's where it rested on her stomach, protecting the tiny life growing between them. For the first time since the divorce, Clara's dreams were peaceful. But peace never lasted long. The call came 3 days later while Clara was at work, coordinating a lunch service that had gone sideways when half the waitstaff called in sick. She barely glanced at her phone when it rang, assuming it was another vendor with another crisis. Then she saw Dominic's name and the unusual time. He never called during business hours unless something was wrong. Hello? Where are you right now? His voice was tight, controlled. The restaurant. Why? What's wrong? Stay there. Don't leave the building. I'm sending Marcus to stay with you until I arrive. Clara's heart kicked into overdrive. Dominic, you're scaring me. What happened? Ethan's been watching you. The words landed like a physical blow. What? My people found surveillance photos, dozens of them. You leaving work, going to the doctor, entering my building. He's been following you for weeks. Clara's knees went weak. She grabbed the edge of a table for support. Where is he now? We don't know yet, but we're looking. In the meantime, you don't go anywhere alone, understood? Yes. Clara. His voice softened fractionally. I won't let him hurt you. I promise. I know. She hung up and stood in the middle of the restaurant, surrounded by the controlled chaos of lunch service, feeling the walls close in. Ethan was watching her, had been watching her, learning her routines, her patterns, her life. The nausea that hit had nothing to do with pregnancy. Marcus appeared minutes later, his usually jovial expression replaced with something harder. Boss says I'm on babysitting duty. I'm fine, Marcus. You don't need to. With respect, Clara, this isn't a request. Dominic would have my head if something happened to you on my watch. She wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could take care of herself, but the thought of Ethan out there somewhere, watching and waiting, killed the words in her throat. Okay, she said quietly. Thank you. The rest of the day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Clara tried to focus on work, but her mind kept drifting to those surveillance photos. How long had Ethan been watching? What was he planning? And how had she not noticed? Dominic arrived at 6, his expression grim. He pulled her into his office without a word, checked her over like he was cataloging injuries, then wrapped his arms around her. I'm okay, Clara said against his chest. He's escalating. I know. This can't continue. She pulled back to look at him. What are you going to do? Dominic's expression went cold. What I should have done the moment he put his hands on you. I'm going to end this. What does that mean? It means Ethan Blake is going to learn that some people are untouchable. And you're one of them. The promise in his voice was absolute. And somewhere in the city, unaware of the storm about to descend on him, Ethan was still watching, still waiting, still making the biggest mistake of his life. The investigation Dominic's people conducted was thorough and devastating in its findings. Clara sat in his office 2 days later, staring at a folder thick with evidence of Ethan's obsession. Bank statements showing he'd lost his job 6 months ago. Credit card bills documenting a spiral into debt. Rental agreements for a studio apartment 3 blocks from her old place. And the photos, dozens of them, taken with a telephoto lens from various distances. Clara at the coffee shop. Clara walking into the doctor's office. Clara's hand resting on her barely visible baby bump. The invasion of privacy made her skin crawl. There's more, said Michael Torres, the private investigator Dominic had hired. He was a compact man in his 50s with the kind of face that disappeared in crowds, useful in his line of work. He's been frequenting online forums, talking about his situation. What kind of forums? Clara asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Support groups for divorced men. Except his posts aren't about moving on. They're about justice, revenge, getting back what was stolen from him. Michael pulled out printed screenshots. He's convinced himself that you cheated during the marriage, that the baby proves it, that you destroyed his life deliberately. Clara's hands trembled as she read Ethan's words, each post more unhinged than the last. He'd created an entire narrative where she was the villain and he was the victim, a story that bore no resemblance to reality but had clearly consumed him completely. He's dangerous, Dominic said flatly. This isn't just anger anymore, it's delusion. What do we do? Clara looked between the two men. Restraining order? That's just paper, Michael said. Won't stop someone this committed, might even escalate him, make him feel like he has nothing left to lose. Then what? Dominic's expression was carved from stone. We remove his ability to be a threat. Something in his tone made Clara's pulse quicken. What does that mean exactly? It means we apply pressure until he breaks. Michael's already identified multiple legal vulnerabilities, tax evasion, fraudulent unemployment claims, outstanding debts to people who don't appreciate being ignored. Dominic leaned forward. We squeeze from every angle until he understands that continuing this obsession will destroy what's left of his life. That's Clara struggled for words. That's ruthless. Yes. No apology in his voice. It is. Dominic, I don't want you to become a monster because of me. His hand found hers across the desk. I'm not becoming anything I wasn't already, Clara. I'm just focusing resources I've always had on protecting what matters most. His thumb traced circles on her palm. Ethan made his choices. He put his hands on you while you were carrying my child. He's stalking you, threatening you with his obsession. This isn't about revenge. It's about ensuring he never gets another chance to hurt you. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to insist there had to be another way. But when she looked at those photos, at the evidence of Ethan watching her, following her, building a case in his fractured mind for whatever he planned to do next, she couldn't find the words. How long will it take? She asked instead. A week, Michael said. Maybe less. Once we start moving, things will cascade quickly. Clara nodded slowly. Okay, do it. Dominic squeezed her hand. You're sure? No, but I'm sure that I can't live like this. Looking over my shoulder, wondering when he'll show up, worrying that he'll hurt me or the baby. She met Dominic's eyes. I trust you to handle this right. I will. Michael gathered his materials and left, promising updates within 24 hours. Clara remained in the chair, feeling hollowed out. Is this what your life is always like? Investigating people, finding their weaknesses, applying pressure. Sometimes, Dominic came around the desk and pulled her to her feet, wrapping his arms around her. But usually for business purposes. Leverage in negotiations, insurance against betrayal. This is personal in a way nothing else has been. Does that make it better or worse? I don't know. His voice was rough against her hair. I just know I'd burn down everything I've built to keep you safe. That probably should terrify you. It should, Clara agreed, but it doesn't. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the fading afternoon light, while somewhere in the city, the machinery of Ethan's destruction began to turn. The first domino fell that night. Ethan's landlord received documentation of lease violations and an anonymous tip about illegal activity in the building. By morning, he had an eviction notice. The second domino fell the next afternoon when the IRS received a detailed report of unreported income and fraudulent deductions spanning 3 years. The third domino was more personal. The payday loan company Ethan owed money to suddenly sold his debt to a collection agency known for aggressive tactics. They began calling constantly, showing up at his apartment, making his life a living hell. Michael reported each development to Dominic with clinical precision, and Clara listened with a growing sense of unreality. This was her ex-husband's life imploding in real time, orchestrated, deliberate, merciless. Is this what you meant by operating in gray spaces? She asked Dominic on the third day. Yes. It feels like we're destroying him. We're removing his ability to destroy you. Dominic's voice was patient but firm. There's a difference. Clara wanted to believe that, wanted to think this was justice rather than revenge, protection rather than cruelty. But watching Ethan's world collapse, even from a distance, even knowing what he'd done, left a bitter taste in her mouth. The cafe incident happened on day 5. Clara had convinced Dominic to let her grab coffee alone, insisting that she couldn't live in a bubble forever. She'd chosen a place near the office, busy enough to feel safe, with large windows facing the street. She was waiting for her order when Ethan walked in. Their eyes met across the cafe, and Clara's breath stopped. He looked terrible, unshaven, wearing wrinkled clothes with the kind of desperate energy that came from someone whose life was actively falling apart. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Ethan started toward her, and Clara's hand instinctively went to her phone. Don't, Ethan said, his voice ragged. Please, just don't call anyone. I just want to talk. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to call Dominic, to do anything except stand there facing the man who'd spent years making her feel worthless. But something in his expression stopped her. Not the old rage, not the entitlement, just exhaustion, and maybe a hint of actual remorse. You have 2 minutes, Claire said, her finger hovering over Dominic's number. Then I'm calling for help. I know what's happening. Ethan stayed several feet away, his hands visible, non-threatening. The eviction, the IRS, the debt collectors. It's him, isn't it? Your new boyfriend. Clara said nothing. I deserve it. The admission seemed to cost him. I know I do. The things I did to you, the way I treated you, his voice cracked. I was so angry at the world for what I couldn't have that I made you the target of everything. And that was wrong. Yes, Clara said quietly. It was. Is it true? Are you really pregnant? She could lie, could refuse to answer. But something about this moment, Ethan finally seeing himself clearly, the walls between them stripped away, demanded honesty. Yes. He flinched like she'd struck him. The doctors really were wrong about you. They were wrong about us, Clara corrected. Whatever the problem was, it wasn't just me. Maybe it was the stress. Maybe it was compatibility. Maybe it was that we were fundamentally broken together in a way that prevented anything good from growing. And with him, you're not broken. No. She touched her stomach, feeling the small swell where their child grew. With him, I'm whole. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, Clara, for everything, for the years I wasted blaming you, for the hit, for stalking you, for... He choked on the words. For breaking you down when I should have been building you up. Clara felt her own eyes burn. This was the apology she'd needed 3 years ago. The acknowledgement that she hadn't imagined the cruelty, hadn't deserved the treatment, hadn't been the problem. It came too late to fix anything, but maybe it was enough to let her finally close that chapter completely. Thank you, she said, for saying that. It doesn't change anything. No, it doesn't. Ethan nodded, accepting this. What happens now? Does he destroy me completely? Clara thought about the investigation, the pressure being applied from every angle, the systematic dismantling of Ethan's life. That depends on you. On me how? Walk away, Ethan. Leave Baltimore. Start over somewhere else. Stop watching me. Stop obsessing. Stop building narratives where I'm the villain. She held his gaze. Do that, and I'll ask him to stop. You'll still face consequences for what you've already done. The IRS doesn't forget, and your debts still exist, but the active pursuit ends. And if I don't? Then you'll learn exactly how powerful Dominic Varela is, and exactly how far he'll go to protect what's his. The threat hung between them, all the more potent for being delivered in Clara's calm, steady voice. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, and she wondered what he saw. Not the broken woman he'd divorced 6 months ago, not the convenient target for his rage and disappointment. Someone stronger, someone who'd survived him and built something better, someone beyond his reach. Okay, he said finally. I'll go. I have family in Oregon. I'll figure something out there. Good. Clara. He stopped, searching for words. I hope you're happy. I mean that. I hope he treats you the way I should have. He does. Ethan nodded, turned, and walked out of the cafe without looking back. Clara stood there shaking, adrenaline crashing through her system now that the immediate danger had passed. She called Dominic with trembling fingers. He answered on the first ring. Where are you? The cafe on Market Street. Ethan was here. I'm 2 minutes away. Are you hurt? No, we talked. Clara's voice wavered. I think it's over, Dominic. I think he's actually going to leave. I'll believe it when he's gone. Dominic arrived 90 seconds later with 2 security personnel Clara hadn't realized were following her. He pulled her against his chest, checking her over with barely controlled panic while simultaneously barking orders into his phone. I'm fine, Clara insisted. He didn't touch me. He apologized. I don't care if he apologized while tap dancing. He approached you without permission. Dominic's voice was ice. Michael, I want eyes on Blake 24/7. If he so much as looks in Clara's direction again. Dominic, Clara put her hand over his phone. Stop, please. He looked at her, fury and fear warring in his expression. I told him if he leaves, if he actually goes to Oregon and stays away, we'll stop actively pursuing him. Clara held his gaze. I need this to end, not with him destroyed completely, but with him gone. Just gone. He doesn't deserve mercy. I'm not doing it for him. I'm doing it for me. Her voice steadied. I don't want to build our life together on the foundation of someone else's destruction, even his. Can you understand that? Dominic stared at her for a long moment. Then he lifted his phone back to his ear. Michael, follow Blake, but maintain distance. I want to know where he goes, who he talks to, and when he leaves town. But unless he makes a move toward Clara, we let him run." He hung up and cupped Clara's face in his hands. "If he comes back, if he breaks this agreement, then you can do whatever you think is necessary," Clara finished. "But give him the chance to do the right thing first. You're too good for this world." "No, I'm just tired of being afraid, and I think actual closure means letting him fade into someone I used to know rather than someone we had to destroy." Dominic kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her mouth, a tender claiming that spoke of relief and lingering worry. "I love you." "I love you too." They stood on the sidewalk while pedestrians flowed around them, two people trying to build something good from the wreckage of their pasts. Ethan Blake left Baltimore 3 days later on a Greyhound bus heading west. Michael's people confirmed his arrival in Portland and documented him moving into his cousin's spare room. The surveillance photos stopped. The threatening forum posts disappeared. The obsession that had driven him to stalk his ex-wife simply ended. Clara wanted to believe it was real, that Ethan had finally seen himself clearly and chosen to walk away. Dominic remained skeptical, keeping security protocols in place and maintaining periodic checks on Ethan's location. But as weeks passed without incident, even he began to relax. Life shifted into a new normal. Clara's pregnancy progressed steadily, her body changing in ways both fascinating and frustrating. Dominic attended every doctor's appointment, asked endless questions, and read more pregnancy books than Clara thought existed. They told his sister about the engagement and baby during a dinner that started tense and ended with Elena crying happy tears while hugging Clara and whispering, "Thank you for giving him something to love besides work." Clara's parents received a phone call that went about as well as expected. Surprise, concern, tentative congratulations, and an invitation to visit that everyone knew wouldn't be accepted. The businesses continued running smoothly under Clara's coordination. She worked until week 22, when Dominic gently insisted she transition to working from home, citing the stress and physical demands. She'd argued. He'd countered with doctors' recommendations and the sheer force of his concern. She'd agreed to part-time and remote work, secretly relieved. They set a wedding date for December, small, intimate, just family and close friends. Elena helped Clara find a dress that would accommodate her growing belly without looking like a tent. Dominic ordered flowers, hired a photographer, and personally handled every detail with the kind of focused intensity he usually reserved for business negotiations. "It's not the wedding," Clara teased. "It's about controlling your environment. It's about making sure your day is perfect," he corrected. "There's a difference." She kissed him, feeling overwhelmed by the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. 6 months ago, she'd been broken and alone, convinced her life was over. Now she was engaged to a man who loved her fiercely, carrying a child she'd thought impossible, building a future that felt almost too good to be real. The nightmare came on a Tuesday night in early November. Clara woke gasping, Dominic's name on her lips, her hand clutching her stomach. He was beside her immediately, hands gentle as he checked her over. "What's wrong? Is it the baby?" No, I just..." Clara tried to catch her breath. "Bad dream. Ethan was here. He had a knife. He was..." She couldn't finish. Dominic pulled her against his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. "He's in Oregon. Michael confirmed his location yesterday. He's working at a warehouse and hasn't left the state." "I know. Rationally, I know." Clara's voice shook. "But my brain doesn't care about rational right now." "What do you need?" She thought about it. "Talk to me. About something good. Something that has nothing to do with Ethan or the past." Dominic settled back against the headboard, keeping her wrapped in his arms. "I've been thinking about names." "For the baby?" "No, for the dog we're getting." His tone was dry. "Yes, for the baby." Despite everything, Clara smiled. "Okay, what names?" "For a boy, I like Sebastian, or James, classic, strong." His hand settled on her belly. "For a girl, maybe Elena, after my sister." "Those are good names." Clara traced patterns on his chest. "What if the baby hates them?" "Then the baby can pick a nickname, but legally they're getting a name with gravitas." "Gravitas?" "Our child is going to inherit my business empire and your impossible stubbornness. They'll need a name that commands respect." Clara laughed. the nightmare finally releasing its grip on her chest. Your business empire? I'm being optimistic about the future. They lay in the dark, talking about names and nursery colors and whether they wanted to know the sex before birth. Dominic's voice was a steady rumble that gradually lulled Clara back toward sleep. Just before she drifted off, she whispered, "Thank you." For what? For making me feel safe, even when my brain tries to convince me I'm not. His arms tightened around her. Always. Clara slept peacefully for the rest of the night, dreamless and warm. The wedding happened on a December afternoon with light snow falling outside the windows. Clara wore ivory silk that draped elegantly over her 7-month belly, her hair swept up with small white flowers woven through it. Dominic stood at the altar in a dark suit, his expression doing something complicated when she walked down the aisle. Later, he'd tell her he'd never seen anything more beautiful. Later, she'd admit she'd cried the moment their eyes met, because everything finally felt real. The ceremony was simple. Traditional vows with a few personal additions, rings exchanged, a kiss that made Elena cheer and the handful of guests applaud. And then Clara was Clara Varela, and the baby growing inside her had parents who were married and in love and ready to build something that would last. The reception was small, just dinner at Meridian with their closest people. Marcus had outdone himself with the food. The sommelier had found non-alcoholic wines that actually tasted good. And Dominic never let go of Clara's hand except when absolutely necessary. "Happy?" he asked during a quiet moment, their foreheads pressed together while a pianist played something soft in the background. "Absurdly," Clara smiled. "You?" "More than I thought possible." They danced slowly despite her awkward balance, Clara's belly between them like a promise of their future. "I can't believe we pulled this off," she murmured. "What, the wedding?" "All of it. 6 months ago, I was broken and alone. Now I'm married to you, pregnant with our child, running a business I'm good at. It feels like a dream." "It's not a dream." Dominic's hand settled on her stomach, feeling their baby move beneath his palm. "It's what happens when someone finally treats you the way you deserve." Claire's eyes filled with tears, hormones and happiness, and the sheer overwhelming gratitude for this man who'd seen her at her lowest and offered her a future. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too." He kissed her gently. "Both of you." The baby kicked, as if in agreement, and they both laughed. The evening wound down slowly. Guests departed with well wishes and promises to visit once the baby arrived. Elena hugged them both, crying again, telling them they were going to be amazing parents. Finally, it was just Clara and Dominic in the back of a car heading home, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her. "Mrs. Varela," he said, testing the name. "That's me." Clara smiled. "Still getting used to it." "Take your time. We have forever." Forever. 6 months ago, forever had felt like a prison sentence. Now it felt like a gift. They arrived at the penthouse, and Dominic carried her over the threshold despite her protests about her weight and his back. "Tradition," he insisted, setting her down gently in the foyer. "And you're not that heavy." "I'm 7 months pregnant." "You're perfect." He kissed her until she forgot to argue, his hands gentle on her body as he slowly removed the wedding dress and replaced it with reverent touches. They made love carefully, Dominic hyper-aware of her pregnant body, Clara losing herself in the certainty of his touch. Afterward, they lay tangled together, her back to his chest, his hand splayed protectively over their child. "Thank you," Dominic whispered into her hair. "For what?" "For saying yes. For trusting me. For giving me a family." His voice roughened. "For being brave enough to let yourself be happy." Clara laced her fingers through his. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. For believing I was worth saving." "You saved yourself, Clara. I just gave you the space to do it." She turned in his arms to face him. "We saved each other then." "Yeah," he smiled. "I think we did." They fell asleep like that, husband and wife, wrapped around each other and the promise of the child between them. And for the first time in her life, Clara Hayes Varela felt completely, undeniably whole. The pregnancy's final weeks arrived with a mixture of anticipation and discomfort that left Clara simultaneously eager to meet their child and dreading the actual birth process. Her body had become a foreign landscape, swollen ankles, constant backaches, and a baby who seemed determined to use her ribs as a punching bag. Dominic handled it all with patience that bordered on saintly. He rubbed her feet without being asked, made midnight runs for whatever strange food combination she craved, and talked to her belly every night like their child could already understand him. "You need to give your mother a break," he'd say, his hand warm against her tight skin. "She's working hard to bring you into the world. The least you can do is stop kicking her bladder." The baby would inevitably kick harder, as if in defiance. Clara would laugh despite the discomfort, overwhelmed by the domesticity of it all. This man, who operated in spaces between legal and illegal, who'd systematically dismantled her ex-husband's life, who commanded respect with a single look, was currently having a one-sided argument with their unborn child about bladder etiquette. "I love you," she'd say, apropos of nothing. And Dominic would look up with that soft expression he reserved only for her and respond, "I love you more." They were in the nursery putting final touches on the space when Clara's phone rang with an unknown organ number. She almost didn't answer, almost let it go to voicemail, but something made her pick up. "Hello? Clara, it's Ethan." Her blood went cold. Beside her, Dominic's entire body tensed, his hand immediately reaching for his own phone. "Why are you calling me?" Clara's voice was steadier than she felt. "We had an agreement. I know I'm not breaking it. I just needed to tell you something." He sounded different, calmer, more grounded than she'd heard in years. "I got help, therapy. I've been working through everything that happened. Everything I did." Clara didn't respond, waiting. "I'm calling because my therapist suggested I make amends, real ones. Not just apologizing and asking for forgiveness, but acknowledging the damage I caused and taking responsibility for it." He paused. "You don't owe me anything, Clara. Not your time, not your forgiveness, nothing. But I needed you to know that I understand now. What I did to you, how I broke you down systematically for 3 years, how I blamed you for my failures and made you carry shame that was never yours." Tears pricked Clara's eyes. Dominic moved closer, his hand settling protectively on her lower back. "I destroyed something good because I couldn't accept that sometimes things just don't work out," Ethan continued. "And then when you found happiness without me, I tried to destroy that too. Because if I couldn't be happy, why should you?" "Ethan, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just saying I'm sorry. For every cruel word, for the hitting, for the stalking, for trying to take away your peace." His voice cracked. "You deserved better. You always deserved better. And I'm glad you found it." Clara wiped her eyes, Dominic's thumb tracing soothing circles on her back. "Thank you for saying that. I won't call again. I needed you to know that none of it was your fault. The infertility, the marriage falling apart, all of it. That was on me. My issues, my failings. You were never broken, Clara. I was." "I hope you find peace, Ethan," Clara said softly. "I really do. I'm working on it. Congratulations on the baby and the marriage. Be happy, Clara. That's all I want for you now." The line went dead. Clara stood in the nursery holding her phone, emotions swirling in her chest like a storm. Anger and sadness and relief and something that might have been closure. "Are you okay?" Dominic asked quietly. "I think so." She looked up at him. "I think that was his way of actually letting go, of giving me permission to move on without carrying his damage anymore." "You never needed his permission for that." "I know, but sometimes hearing it anyway helps." Clara set down her phone and wrapped her arms around Dominic's waist as much as her belly would allow. "It's really over now. Not because he left Baltimore, but because he finally took responsibility." Dominic held her carefully, his chin resting on top of her head. "How do you feel about it?" "Lighter," Clara admitted. "Like I've been carrying a weight I didn't realize was there, and he just lifted it." "Good. That's good." They stood like that for a long moment, Clara's hand on her belly, where their baby continued its restless movement. "Do you think our child will have issues because of my past?" she asked suddenly. "Because their mother was in an abusive marriage? Because their father operates in morally gray spaces?" "I think our child will have 2 parents who love them fiercely and will do everything possible to give them a good life," Dominic said. "The rest we figure out as we go. What if we mess it up? Then we'll mess it up together, and we'll fix it, and we'll keep trying. He pulled back to look at her. Clara, you're going to be an amazing mother. You're strong and kind, and you've survived things that would have broken other people. Our child will learn from that. And from you, they'll learn how to systematically destroy their enemies? Dominic's mouth quirked. Or how to protect the people they love, depends on your perspective. Clara laughed despite herself. We're going to be interesting parents. The best kind. 2 weeks later, Clara's water broke at 3 in the morning while she was reading in bed because the baby's acrobatics made sleep impossible. One moment she was engrossed in a novel. The next she felt a warm gush and thought absurdly, well, that's inconvenient. Dominic. She shook his shoulder. Dominic, wake up. He was alert immediately, years of staying vigilant even in sleep kicking in. What's wrong? My water just broke. For a moment, he just stared at her. Then he launched into motion with the kind of controlled efficiency that would have been impressive if Clara wasn't actively going into labor. He had her hospital bag packed and in the car within 5 minutes, had called her doctor and confirmed she was headed to the hospital within 7. Had Clara in the passenger seat with her seatbelt carefully fastened around her belly within 10. Breathe, he told her as they pulled out of the garage. I am breathing. No, you're holding your breath. Breathe. Clara forced herself to inhale deeply. A contraction hit halfway through, and she gripped the door handle hard enough to leave marks. That's normal, Dominic said, though his knuckles were white on the steering wheel. The contractions will get closer together. We're timing them. Have you been reading my pregnancy books? All of them, twice. Despite the pain, Clara felt warmth flood her chest. This man who ran an empire and operated in dangerous spaces had spent months reading pregnancy guides to make sure he'd be prepared for this moment. The drive to the hospital took 12 minutes that felt like hours. Dominic had her checked in and settled in a labor and delivery room with the kind of smooth authority that suggested he'd called ahead and made arrangements. Which, knowing him, he absolutely had. The next 14 hours were a blur of contractions and epidurals and doctors checking her progress with frustrating regularity. Dominic never left her side, holding her hand through the worst of it, letting her squeeze until his fingers went numb, wiping sweat from her forehead, and telling her she was doing great even when she was pretty sure she was dying. I can't do this, Clara gasped during a particularly brutal contraction. I can't. It's too much. Yes, you can. Dominic's voice was steady, certain. You're the strongest person I know. You survived Ethan. You rebuilt yourself from nothing. You're going to bring our child into this world, and it's going to be the most amazing thing either of us has ever done. Easy for you to say. You're not being split in half. I know, and if I could do this for you, I would, but I can't. So I'm going to stay right here and tell you that you're incredible until you believe it. Another contraction hit before Clara could respond. She bore down, following the doctor's instructions, feeling like her body was tearing itself apart to make room for this new life. Almost there, the doctor said. One more big push, Clara. She pushed with everything she had left, Dominic's hand tight in hers. His voice in her ear telling her she could do this. She was doing it, almost there. And then, a cry. High and indignant and absolutely perfect. It's a boy, the doctor announced, lifting a small, squirming, utterly beautiful baby into the air. Clara's vision blurred with tears as they placed her son on her chest, his tiny face scrunched up in outrage at being evicted from his warm home. Hi, she whispered, her hands trembling as she touched his impossibly small head. Hi, baby. We've been waiting for you. Dominic stood frozen beside the bed, staring at their son with an expression Clara had never seen before. Pure, undiluted awe mixed with terror. You can touch him, she said softly. His hand came up slowly, one finger brushing their son's tiny fist. The baby immediately gripped it, that automatic newborn reflex, and something in Dominic's face cracked wide open. He's perfect, Dominic whispered. Clara, he's perfect. We made him. We did. He leaned down to kiss her forehead, then the baby's. Thank you. Thank you for this. The nurses took their son briefly to clean him up and do all the necessary newborn assessments, while Clara delivered the placenta and got stitched up. Dominic stayed with the baby, watching the nurses like a hawk to make sure they were gentle enough. When they finally brought him back wrapped in a blue blanket with a tiny hat on his head, Dominic took him with the careful reverence of someone holding something infinitely precious. Hey, Sebastian, he murmured, testing the name they'd decided on. I'm your dad, and that incredible woman over there is your mom. We're going to take care of you, keep you safe, love you more than anything in this world. Sebastian yawned, utterly unimpressed with the speech. Clara laughed, exhausted and sore and happier than she'd ever been in her life. I think he's already tired of your monologues. He'll get used to them. Dominic brought Sebastian over to the bed, settling him carefully in Clara's arms. How are you feeling? Like I just pushed a human out of my body. Fair assessment. They sat together in the quiet hospital room, just the three of them, watching Sebastian sleep and occasionally startle at sounds only he could hear. I can't believe he's real, Clara whispered. That we made him, that he's actually here. I know. Dominic's arm wrapped around her shoulders, his other hand resting gently on Sebastian's back. Our son. The weight of those two words settled over them both. This tiny person was theirs to protect, to raise, to love. Everything they did from now on would be shaped around keeping him safe and giving him the best life possible. It was terrifying. It was perfect. Clara looked up at Dominic and saw her own emotions reflected in his face. Wonder and fear, and overwhelming love for this small life they'd created. We're going to be good at this, she said, trying to convince herself as much as him. We're going to try our hardest, Dominic corrected. And when we mess up, because we will, we'll fix it and keep going. Together. Always together. Sebastian made a small sound halfway between a sigh and a whimper, and they both looked down to find his eyes open, dark blue and unfocused, but definitely looking at something. Hi, baby, Clara whispered. Welcome to the world. It's big and scary sometimes, but you have us, and we have you, and that's going to be enough. The baby yawned again, then settled back into sleep. Apparently satisfied with this arrangement, Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks. Exhaustion and hormones and pure happiness combining into an overwhelming wave of emotion. Dominic wiped them away gently. I love you. I love you too. She leaned into him, their son warm and solid between them. Thank you for saving me. You saved yourself, he reminded her. I just gave you the space to do it. Then thank you for the space, and for this, and for everything. They stayed like that until the nurses came to take Sebastian to the nursery so Clara could sleep. Dominic went with him, unwilling to let their son out of his sight, promising to bring him back for the next feeding. Clara watched them go, her husband and her son, and felt the last pieces of her old life finally fall away completely. She wasn't Ethan's broken wife anymore. She wasn't the invisible woman who'd believed herself worthless. She was Clara Varela. Wife, mother, survivor, and she was exactly who she was meant to be. The next few weeks passed in a blur of sleepless nights and endless diaper changes and figuring out how to function on 2 hours of sleep. Sebastian was a good baby by most standards. He ate well, slept in 3-hour stretches, and only cried when he needed something. But he was still a newborn, which meant Clara and Dominic stumbled through those early days with the bewildered exhaustion of all new parents. Dominic threw himself into fatherhood with the same intensity he applied to everything else. He learned to change diapers with military precision, mastered the art of the perfect swaddle, and could get Sebastian to burp faster than Clara could. You're scarily good at this, she observed one night while watching him rock their son to sleep. I read 12 books on infant care. Of course you did. Also YouTube videos. There's an entire channel dedicated to swaddling techniques. Clara laughed, feeling her heart expand impossibly further. This man who commanded respect through quiet authority was currently watching YouTube tutorials on how to wrap a baby in a blanket. I love you, she said for the 1,000th time. I love you too. He glanced over, Sebastian tucked securely against his chest. Both of you. They settled into a routine over the following months. Clara took leave from work to focus on Sebastian, though she still consulted remotely on major decisions. Dominic rearranged his schedule to be home more, delegating responsibilities and handling meetings from his home office when possible. Elena visited weekly, bringing meals and baby clothes and an endless stream of unsolicited advice that was actually surprisingly helpful. She'd watch Sebastian for hours, giving Clara and Dominic time to shower or nap or just sit together in silence. "You're both naturals at this," she said one afternoon while Sebastian napped in her arms. "I was terrified you'd be disaster parents, but look at you. Functioning adults with a thriving baby." "The bar was low," Dominic observed. "Still, you cleared it." Elena smiled down at her nephew. "He's going to have a good life. You're going to make sure of it." Clara felt the truth of that settle in her bones. Whatever challenges came, whatever obstacles they faced, she and Dominic would handle them together. They'd protect their son, give him opportunities, teach him to be strong and kind and better than the world that had tried to break his parents. The nightmares about Ethan faded gradually. Some nights Clara would still wake in a panic, convinced he was there, only to find Dominic beside her and Sebastian safe in his crib. But those nights became less frequent as months passed, and the security of her new life solidified. Michael continued periodic checks on Ethan's location, confirming he'd stayed in Oregon, maintained his warehouse job, and by all accounts was actually working on himself. The reports came monthly, then quarterly, then stopped altogether when Dominic decided the threat had truly passed. "He's gone," Dominic told Clara 6 months after Sebastian's birth. "Really, completely gone. You don't have to worry about him anymore." And finally, Clara believed it. When Sebastian was 8 months old, Clara returned to work part-time. She'd missed the challenge of coordinating between the 3 venues, the satisfaction of solving problems and building something successful. But now she had balance. Work that fulfilled her, a family that grounded her, a life that felt genuinely hers. She'd stand sometimes in the middle of Meridian during a busy service, watching staff move efficiently through their tasks and think about how far she'd come. From the broken woman who'd waited tables here to the woman who managed operations. From someone who believed herself worthless to someone who knew her value. Dominic would appear occasionally during these moments, always seeming to sense when she needed him. He'd pull her aside, kiss her softly, and ask how she was doing. "Good," she'd say. "Really good." And mean it completely. They celebrated Sebastian's first birthday with a small party at the penthouse. Just family and close friends, with a cake that Sebastian destroyed enthusiastically while everyone laughed and took pictures. Clara watched her son smash frosting into his hair and felt overwhelming gratitude for every decision that had led to this moment. The divorce that had felt like the end of everything. The job offer that had changed her trajectory. The man who'd seen her when she was invisible and chosen to help her rise. "What are you thinking about?" Dominic asked, sliding an arm around her waist. "How different my life is from where I thought it would be," Clara admitted. "A year and a half ago, I was convinced I'd failed at everything, that I was broken beyond repair, that I'd spend the rest of my life alone and empty. And now? Now I have everything I never knew I wanted." She leaned into him. "A husband who loves me, a son who's perfect, work that matters, a life that's actually mine." "You built that life, Clara, all of it." "We built it," she corrected, "together." Sebastian squealed and threw a handful of cake, catching Elena directly in the face. The room erupted in laughter while Elena wiped frosting from her eyes and declared her nephew a menace. Dominic pulled Clara closer, both of them watching their son navigate his first birthday with chaotic joy. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked quietly. "Taking a chance on the broken waitress who needed saving? You weren't broken. You were breaking free." Dominic turned her to face him. "And I don't regret a single moment, not the job offer, not falling in love with you, not this life we've built. You're the best decision I ever made." Clara kissed him, tasting champagne and cake frosting and the absolute certainty of his love. When they pulled apart, Sebastian was watching them with wide eyes, cake covering his face and hands. "Dada," he said clearly, his first real word. Dominic's expression did something complicated. He crossed to their son, lifted him out of the high chair despite the mess, and held him close. "That's right," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm your dad, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know you're loved." Sebastian grabbed Dominic's face with frosting-covered hands, leaving sticky prints on his cheeks. Clara captured the moment on her phone. Her husband covered in cake, holding their son, both of them grinning at each other like they'd discovered the secret to happiness. Maybe they had. That night, after the guests left and Sebastian was asleep in his crib, Clara and Dominic sat on their balcony overlooking the harbor. The city glittered below them, alive with possibilities. I never thanked you properly, Clara said, breaking the comfortable silence. For what? For that day in the cafe, when Ethan had his hand around my throat and you walked in. She turned to look at him. You didn't know me. Not really. You could have walked away, let someone else handle it. But you didn't. I knew enough, Dominic said simply. I knew you deserved better than what he was giving you, and I had the power to make sure you got it. You changed my entire life in that moment. We changed each other's lives. His hand found hers. You gave me something to love besides work and reputation. Gave me a family. Showed me that the spaces between right and wrong don't have to be where I live permanently. Are you going legitimate? Clara asked, only half teasing. I'm going strategic. Focusing more on the businesses you manage, less on the facilitating I used to do. He smiled. Turns out having a wife and child makes you reconsider the wisdom of operating in gray areas. I never asked you to change. I know, but I want to. For you. For Sebastian. For the life we're building. He pulled her closer. I want to be someone our son can be proud of without qualifications. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Happiness and love and gratitude all tangling together. He's going to be proud of you no matter what. Because you're a good man, Dominic Varela. Maybe not by everyone's definition, but by the one that matters most. What definition is that? You protect the people you love. You keep your promises. You choose mercy when you could choose violence. You gave a broken woman a chance to rebuild herself and never made her feel like she owed you for it. Clara touched his face. That's the definition of good that matters. Dominic kissed her palm, then her wrist, then finally her mouth. A slow, deep kiss that tasted like coming home. I love you, he whispered against her lips. I love you too. They sat on the balcony until the city quieted and the stars became visible through the light pollution. Inside, Sebastian slept peacefully, safe and loved and completely unaware of the journey his parents had taken to reach this moment. Clara thought about everything that had brought her here, the pain of her first marriage, the moment of freedom when she finally walked away, the chance encounter with a man who'd seen her value when she couldn't see it herself. She'd been convinced she was broken, but she'd just been waiting for the right life to begin. And now, wrapped in Dominic's arms with their son sleeping nearby and a future full of possibilities stretching ahead, Clara understood the truth. She had never been broken. She had simply been becoming the person she was always meant to be. Strong, loved, whole. A survivor who'd learned that sometimes the best revenge is building something beautiful from the ashes of what tried to destroy you. And as the city lights twinkled below and Dominic's heartbeat steadied beneath her ear, Clara finally let go of the last shadow of her past. She was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly who she was meant to be with, living the life she'd earned through survival and courage, and refusing to let the world make her small. The broken waitress was gone. Clara Varela remained, and she was magnificent,